Welcome to the Game Week podcast, powered by Keros, the #1 solution for maximising preparation and performance in elite sport. I'm your host, Andrew Trimble, and every episode will be taking a deep dive behind the scenes of the elite sports world as we chat with key stakeholders in high-performance environments about their stories and how they manage their game week. This week, we've got Tom McLaughlin. Tom is the high-performance manager at English Championship club Ealing Trailfinders. He's got previous experience over the last 15 years in working with Wasps, Connacht, the IRFU and Bristol in various S&C and fitness roles. His current role at Ealing has him overseeing all S&C, sports science, medical, analysis and nutritional services, all to improve on-field performance. Okay, Tom McLaughlin, welcome along to the Game Week podcast. It's great to have you.
No, thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
We'll start the way we always start with this high level conversation. Why do you do what you do? Why are you passionate about what you do?
Good question. I like improving people, seeing how far they can go, seeing if they can reach their potential, and enjoy being part of an environment that has a shared goal and a shared ambition, and everything that comes with that on a daily basis, the highs, the lows, the good times, the bad times, and the interactions with different personalities and different people along the way.
Is Ealing Trailfinders, has it got the potential to be an exaggerated example of that? Because the highs could be so high, getting promoted into the Premiership, or the difficulties of obviously the Saracens game recently.
Yeah, definitely. I joined the club around 5 years ago now. The growth in that 5-year period has been huge, both on the field and also off the field, with new facilities, our academy program opening, the women's program starting as well. And yeah, I think this season's been a massive roller coaster. We had an extremely long pre-season, which was good for us in some ways. It started with the Trailfinders Cup, then the championship itself, and then, as you mentioned, two really tough games against a quality Saracens team. But I think a lot of people, players and coaches, have learned a lot from the experience as well. So yeah, definitely lots of highs, but a few lows as well. I think that's only to be expected.
And the nature of a championship team as well, everything kind of is funneling towards promotion, that ultimate goal, and then the likes of Exeter show that doesn't have to be the ceiling. You can push on and you can be successful, as they've shown, and it's been a fairy tale for them. Is that a vision? Is that something you adhere to? Is that the way you see things? And obviously seeing an example of it makes it really realistic, or is it too far away? Is it a short-term goals versus long-term vision?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we've got to make sure that we're, an extremely consistent competitive team in the championship, which I think that we have done over the last 2 to 3 years. But now definitely as an organisation, we're looking north and seeing, can we break into that Premiership? And for us, that is the goal. We want to do that as soon as possible. We have everything off the field and on the field in place for that. We're not the finished article, but we're getting closer each season. I think results this season showed that as well. But when we do go into the Premiership, then, we want to be competitive. We don't want to be there just to make up the numbers. But we also understand that, people like to compare Exeter's journey as well. But that took them a lot of time as well, pre-getting into the Championship. And it's taken them time since they've got into the Premiership as well. So these things don't happen overnight. You have to grow the club, as a brand, as an organisation. And for us, it's a little bit more challenging in terms of where we're situated in West London. There's a lot of other things that people can do, for instance, compared to, say, in Exeter, where they've got quite a sort of a monopoly on the geographical area. But they're all things that we're working towards over the next sort of 3 to 5 years.
You mentioned you do what you do because you're passionate about seeing fellas improve and seeing that progression. Tell us a little bit about the story then of Ealing over the last few years, and some young fellas coming into the squad and seeing that progression. Give us a little bit of insight on what that looks like at Ealing.
Yeah, definitely. So when I joined in 2016, I came in at the same time as the head coach who was working underneath the director of rugby at the time, Alex Codlin. And we both came in. The club had literally stayed in the championship, I think, by a couple of points on the last day of the season. So they would have been relegated to National 1, but they stayed up. And that year we definitely overachieved. We finished third and we had to play Leeds in the semi-final at the time. We lost one game, won the other one, but ultimately lost on points over the 2 legs. But ever since then, each year we've progressed. Whether that's better players, better coaches, more facilities, better structure. But yeah, it's a really interesting mix, because what you get within this competition as well is you get a lot of sort of young guys that are eager to make their mark. Maybe they quite haven't made it at the senior level at, perceived bigger clubs. You get some more experienced guys that may be stepping down on a different part of their journey. And then you sprinkle that in with some overseas players as well. So it's made for a very eclectic mix. And I think a big part of the job of the coaching staff, and particularly something that I've tried to help with, is I suppose trying to get that cohesion right as well, and make sure that we're all sort of aligned on that path to try and be competitive as much as possible. And it's also about trying to make sure that you're convincing and you're able to inspire the players, because every year, when we're in this competition, we face a Premiership team, and it's a question of having to be enthused by that and not let it daunt you, and really relish it as an opportunity to prove yourself against tougher opposition, rather than going into your shell and thinking, they're coming down from the Premiership, it's a foregone conclusion, etc., etc. But each year we've played against those Premiership teams, we've been more and more competitive, and the results kind of show that. Really, we played London Irish in a cup final a few years ago. They had a very good team out, and we beat them to win that cup. We played Newcastle with pre-season friendlies this year. We won the home game at our place quite convincingly, and then lost by about, I think, 10 or 12 points away. So we're there or thereabouts, but we're not under any illusions that we've still got a long way left in the journey as well.
Is it difficult every season with you touched on it there a little bit with high turnover in players, guys looking to get a bit of experience, to get a bit of an opportunity to potentially either kick on with you guys, and if that doesn't work out, kick on and get an opportunity with a Premiership team? Is it difficult or easier to start again every season if you don't manage to get promotion, and if you don't manage to kind of fulfill that kind of short-term vision? Is it difficult to start again, dust yourself down, right, let's set another tone again at the start of pre-season, all the goal setting and workshops, all that sort of stuff? Or is it actually easier because we've got fresh guys and we're going to have another go at this, and we'll have 100% fresh energy and fresh impetus?
I'd say in the past it's been immensely challenging. I think the last year to 18 months we've had a lot less turnover. So particularly going into this season, the spine of our team, really, if we looked at, say, hooker, 8, 9 and 10, 12, few other positions have been in the club for a while. So there definitely wasn't as much turnover. And I don't think there's going to be going into this season coming either, which does make it easier. But in the past, yeah, for sure. I've been here when we've had like 16 new players at any one time. So that's immensely challenging. And how to combat that really is about trying to make sure that you understand everyone's, I suppose, their origin story, for want of a better expression, like, why they play the game. Why they're here, so that you get to know them more as individuals, and then you can try and blend their story into the story of the club, and really sort of take people on that journey over the course of a season. But in answer to your question, yes, it is challenging. Especially when you have your whole season. I can remember one season vividly. We had Bristol in the division at the time, and we'd gone and played them, I think, 5th game in, and we were right in the game until the last sort of couple of minutes. I think we ended up losing by 8. And then we lost to them by, I think, 2 points at our place later in the season. But yeah, as I'm sure you know as a player, when you're concentrating on that goal throughout the whole season and it's everything you're working towards, and then you might just fall short, it's then quite hard to keep a group motivated if that happens early as well, to keep them chasing the team at the top. So, but you learn from those things, and you're a little bit wiser because of them.
Yeah, that's I've been in a similar position with my career. We had a purple patch with Ulster of kind of 5 years, 6 years, and it always ended the same way. It always ended up getting beat by Leinster, and we got to knockout stages, in Europe, in the league a few years in a row, and it felt like we became the nearly men. And then, because like there's 2 ways of looking at this. If you're Exeter, you get there, you get experience, you get better, you get closer, you get more experience, you get better again, and you grow in confidence through that. I think it had the opposite effect on us, and I'd be interested to hear your take on that. How do you make sure it doesn't have the opposite effect? How do you make sure that you get confidence from one season and bring that into the next, rather than maybe carry a hangover from last season and carry disappointment?
I think it's like anything. You have to look at the context, and that's why I mentioned sort of a few minutes ago, really, how we've done against the Premiership teams over the course of the last 5 years. So when we first came into the division, my first season, we were competing against London Irish, and they were quite a tough team. But we lost narrowly to them, but then slowly that tide starts to turn. And when we had that win against London Irish, and then very narrow defeats to a very strong Bristol team, suddenly the players, they can see light at the end of the tunnel. They see that there's belief there. Okay, we can do this. Yes, we're not too far away. Now, at the start of this season, because this is probably the freshest in my memory, when we beat Newcastle first up, that was a big turning point. We'd had a long pre-season. I think it was something like 4 months. So probably a player's nightmare, but my idea of a dream. and then we played them away and narrowly lost. And then we got into the season itself. Now, yes, okay, we beat the Saracens team. It was a very mixed team twice, but still that gives belief that it can be done. But then, the last 2 weeks, it's a massive challenge to funnel that sort of the energy that we've got over the last year into something positive, because the players, it'll be fresh in their memories, losing heavily to a very good team. But we're lucky we have good staff, good director of rugby. We have good group of senior players that will make sure that we channel, the emotions and the memories into the right manner. Because it's like anything, we understand that when you're, no disrespect to either of the two teams, we play Newcastle versus Saracens, it's two very different challenges. One's got a lot of international players, British and Irish Lions. One perhaps doesn't have the same quality. So you do have to take into account how you perform against both of those teams. But there's plenty of positives to be taken out of both of them. And I think it depends how you see challenges and things that you come across in your life, whether you see it as a positive or whether you see it as a negative. Now, for sure, there are always going to be some people that are going to see it as more of a negative and go, oh, we're still miles away, etc. But for us, it's about putting our best foot forward. And, we've got 2 pre-season friendlies against Gloucester. And so, again, that's another yardstick for us to measure ourselves against.
It's similar maybe to, I'm thinking like Argentina, whenever they entered the rugby championship, they just didn't have that much exposure, that much experience about playing that quality of team regularly. So is that part of your philosophy, Tom? Let's get in front of these guys. Let's play these teams as often as possible. We'll get the guys used to the level of intensity and the level of execution that's required to compete at that level.
Yeah, 100%. Something else we've also been fortunate with is for about 3.5 years now, we've had the England coaches come down to our training ground. So they've taken the players for sessions about 2 or 3 times a year, which has been an invaluable experience. Now, if you speak to some players, they probably don't see it quite like that because they're really tough and intense sessions. But what it does do is it stretches players. Whether we're a player or a coach, in any walk of life, we all need to be stretched because that's how we grow and that's how we develop. And so playing at a higher level against better opposition, but also being exposed out on the training pitch in terms of international coaches, what they expect from players, what they expect in certain sessions, that has also helped us along the way as well. But in answer to your question, most definitely, we want to test ourselves against better opposition.
Yeah, good stuff. Tom, have you got a philosophy that you try and bring, that you try and implement in your squad, and how have you developed that? How has that changed throughout the different environments that you've been in? And then third question, as part of one question, has an influence, growing up, or an influence, that you've worked with, or a mentor, someone impacted you and changed that philosophy?
Jesus, some heavy questions.
I'll be back in about 20 minutes to hear the answer.
I'll probably start, I suppose, when I started in this field. It's the easiest thing to do. So I was quite fortunate. I started as an intern, as most, I suppose, people do in my profession, back in 2005. That was at Bristol. And at the time then, the club had just been promoted back into the Premiership from the old National One. And so rolling back the years now, that was a team that included people like Gareth Llewellyn, Mark Regan, Dave Lemmy at the time, Brian Lima. So it was probably, I would say, a very, very rewarding experience for someone as young as myself then, seeing how those older professionals conducted themselves, massive characters in the game as well. I think if you could withstand running a session in that environment, you could probably run a session anywhere. But yeah, 6 years there, really incredibly fortunate to sort of finish as, head of S&C there for a 2-year period. But some incredible highs and one massive low, really, which I was reflecting upon the other day. And it was the first season of the then championship. And we were playing, it was us and Exeter, nip and tuck. We finished top of the league. The IRFU, in their wisdom, the way they set the season out was, well, you finished top of the league, but we're going to have playoffs for the top 8. So then you went into further 2 groups of 4, which we won our group. Then a semi-final against London Welsh, which we won, and then a 2-legged final against Exeter. And we'd elected to play away first because we won the league, which was the only dubious sort of pleasure that we had for winning the league. And we lost 9-6, and we thought that wasn't too bad. And we then had them at our place the following week. And the rain came down, and as we all know, Exeter, fully deserved. They had a comprehensive victory over us. Gareth Stinson had a sort of a magic night with the boot. And 2 days later, I got married, and a day later, we all got pay cutted. And that was, I suppose, the reality of professional sport in terms of not achieving a goal. The club had budgeted to go up into the Premiership, but obviously that hadn't materialised. So the players and staff were all called in. Fortunately, I was away on honeymoon, or unfortunately.
You get a text.
Look at it. Yeah. So it was like phone call from the head coach. Everyone's got to take a pay cut. We've got to get rid of some staff. Players were free agents, for want of a better expression. So yeah, that was sort of the end of an era there, really. But yeah, definitely some of that time would have shaped my philosophy in terms of being able to get on with different players, understanding different personalities. Some players are very intrinsically motivated, some more extrinsically. Some see strength and conditioning, they love it, and as we know, others just see it as as part of the game. But when you're younger, then you just think it's the be all and end all. And then that took me sort of across to Ireland, and 3 years at Connacht, which again I would say that looking back, is probably the most defining part so far of my career. I had 2 years. The first 2 years we had Eric Elwood as the head coach, and then my last year was Pat Lamb's first year. Some really good people there. You're battling every week, as you probably saw in terms of I suppose maybe not now, but back then you were seen as the fourth of the four provinces.
Mm-hmm.
In most things, whether that's funding, facilities, but the club, the province worked really hard to alter that perception. Whether that was banging on the door of the IRFU for more funding, help with contracting players, etc. And we had a really young squad with some old heads as well, but, learning off some of the older players and younger players there. My last year was when Robbie Henshaw broke through, Kieran Marmion broke through, alongside some older heads like John Muldoon, Michael Swift, people like that. And then seeing the differences in coaching as well. So Eric was extremely passionate about the province, obviously having grown up there, lived there, played there, coached there. And he was a pleasure to work for. And then when Pat came in, very different, had a very clear vision about how he wanted the province and the team to play, and that it was really important that everyone bought into that vision, players and staff, and demanded a lot of, I suppose, everyone in the organisation in a positive way. And I think the young players at the time needed that direction, mm-hmm. and they needed that sort of accountability from the coaching staff. So that was a really interesting period. And then
were they ready for it, Tom? But the young fellas coming through, like Pat Lamb, he's got such a reputation, but it was so different to what we'd seen from Connacht, and it must have been difficult to get that buy-in or that compliance, or maybe the guys were excited about something different.
I think you got probably all of those emotions. Definitely, I think there were some that were probably a bit fearful at first. It was something new and different, and whether we like to admit it or not, we're all a little bit resistant of change, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
So when he came in, there were some players that would have had a very close relationship with the previous coaching staff or with Eric, so probably found it a little bit harder. Younger players, I suppose, you're a bit more carefree. You just want to play, don't you? You just want to do the thing that you enjoy. And if the coach is saying that you have to do X, Y, and Z to get in the team, then you're probably going to do it. But from working with him from an S&C standpoint and with the other staff, it was a lot easier in some ways because, yes, it was demanding, but you knew that, right, this was what was expected of me and my role. And then ultimately you had to deliver it. And it was good because it was also working in line with the IRFU. So at that time, there was a guy that came in, Dave Clark. He had taken over from Philip Morrow. So, and he had more of a sort of a hands-off sort of role at the time because I think it was just coinciding with then Jason Cowman being the national team S&C coach. Mm-hmm. And Dave Clark was a really good sort of mentor to me as well, just in terms of how to manage with different people, manage different departments, mentor staff a bit more because of the experiences that he'd had in rugby, but also in institute sport as well. And I still speak to him every now and again now. So that was a good relationship that was formed. And then I decided at the time, my wife had stayed in the UK because she was going through getting her residency because she's Australian. So she didn't move out. Otherwise, she'd have to start from zero. So I decided to move back. And an opportunity presented itself, different opportunity, take a little bit of a backward step into more of a junior role, an assistant S&C role at Wasps. But again, that was an incredible insight, because just working with the caliber of player that they had there at the time was really insightful to see how those players prepared for games, how skillful they were. I think during the 2 years that I was there, we were the semi-finals of the Premiership and semi-finals of Europe for the last year. But again, formed some good relationships there. I still speak to a couple of people now, some of the coaching staff there and some of the coaches that have moved on. And then, the opportunity presented itself with Ealing, really, which again was sort of a bit of a gamble. I was at a crossroads there. I didn't want to relocate to Coventry because Wasps were moving to Coventry at the time to play to train and play out of Coventry. And so I decided, right, I need to sort of have a bit of a refocus and see, where my career is going. And the opportunity, ironically, came up because of Lee Blackett, who was the backs coach at the time. He had worked with the coach, or the forwards coach that was going into Ealing, Alex Codling, and Alex had said, look, we're looking for someone to head up the strength and conditioning side of things. And Lee had recommended me. And so I spent the next sort of 2.5 years doing that. And then that takes us up to sort of now where I still lead most of the S&C, but do a lot more in terms of making sure that all the departments are really aligned at Ealing to deliver, what the director of rugby wants and requires from the service provision, and that we can play the type of game that he wants to play, and that we've got the players conditioned to do that, but also then that we've got the staff off the field as well to deliver that. So this year, I would say, has been really challenging because we've had a lot of growth. So it's been doing a lot of recruitment. So in terms of staff, whether that's been medical staff, extra S&C staff, we've also recruited a player development and welfare manager to help guys with that off-the-field transition as well. So I'd be heavily involved in a fair bit of the staff recruitment and what goes on off the field, whether that's the planning of new gyms that we've got going on. So we've got a brand new performance centre going up at Brunel University, which will be really impressive when it's done. It's sort of like a 60-metre by 20-metre gym, and then a full 4G pitch as well. So it's at the moment it's turned into a very varied and sort of multifaceted role that I have at the moment. Yeah.
And so Ealing have a good reputation at the minute. You've got a good reputation. It seems like Ealing are kind of differentiating. You seem to be differentiating yourselves as quite forward thinking. You've got the new facility. Is there anything else tied into that? Is there anything else, key vision or key philosophy that the club has kind of harnessed in the last couple of years that we've seen that sort of kind of progression?
I suppose what has come to sort of the light more in the last 18 months, I would say, is just trying to draw some parallels with the history of the company in terms of Trailfinders itself, because we are a young organisation in terms of professional rugby club. I think it's only like 6 or 7 years old. But if you look at our owner, Mike Gooley, the company that he has started, is very sort of, driving, I think it was Land Rovers through Europe and into Africa, and noticing that no one did these types of holidays and these types of adventures. So, a real sort of entrepreneurial, unique mindset that he had has helped to formulate the company that now, ultimately underpins our organisation. So it's about trying to recognise what's our identity. Yes, we've got quite a small history, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't draw on some of the things that have helped us get to where we are now. So yeah, if you were looking, how would you describe Ealing? I would say that it's definitely an ambitious organisation. I would say at times it can be ruthless as well, because we do know where we want to get to, and we have to make sure that everyone that's with us, players, staff, off-field staff, they're all committed to achieving that. But also it's somewhere where, it's also fun as well. I think you can't lose sight of the fact that, you play rugby because you enjoy it. You grow up doing that sport as a youngster and having fun with your friends, and ultimately that's why you get into the game. Now, some players hearing this may not think that fun and me go hand in hand, but ultimately that is why people play the game. So you can't lose sight of that fact either, that if you're not having fun, then there's not really that much point doing it as well.
It's very difficult to get that balance, isn't it? It's very difficult to, I always try to remind myself, this is a game I played because I enjoyed it as a kid. And it almost becomes, whenever you enter the professional world, it becomes about a business. You're talking about the club being ambitious and ruthless, but trying to kind of maintain that family environment, that fun environment. Let's make sure you get that balance, and it's very, very difficult to do that. I'm sure there's some difficult conversations or some things that could be seen as being a contradiction, but it's necessary. It's a business at the end of the day, Tom.
Yeah, 100%. And I think really it comes out to what your expectations, I suppose, and for want of a better expression, values of the organisation are. And we've worked quite hard on that in the last sort of, I'd say, 12 to 18 months. We've probably got it in a place now that we're quite happy with it, that when people come into the organisation, whether it's a new staff member, or a new player, it's really clear what's expected. And I think you just have to not take that for granted as well. It's about reminding players of that each year. So something that, I would do at the start of pre-season is just it's a small presentation about, what's our theme for pre-season, what are the expectations from the players, because I think whether you are a player or a staff member, you just want some clarity. You want to know, right, what am I being judged on? What's expected of me within my role? And are you going to give me the help to be able to do that? And I think as an organisation, it's our duty to make sure that those expectations are clear, but we're also supporting and in the same hand challenging people as well. So yes, we want to challenge them to get better, but then we've also got to provide that support to enable them to get better as well.
I've heard you speak about ownership and ownership, and especially in the context of potentially a young squad, a young ambitious squad. And you talked there just about putting guys out of their comfort zone and stretching ourselves and just putting ourselves under pressure so that we can grow and we can develop. I think there's a lot of athletes that don't necessarily own the plan, own their performance. And I think there's a lot of athletes that are taken by the hand and told what to do. Have you any thoughts on that, on how you get that little bit extra out of guys? You get that ownership and leadership?
Yeah, this is actually a massive topic for discussion that we've been having as coaches as well as senior players as well. I think there's no magic ingredient to it. And I think I look back to some of the self-development that I've done over the course of the last 2 years, and I was quite lucky. I made contact with a guy that's featured in I think the book, it's called The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle, I think, off the top of my head. So there's a guy in there called Dave Cooper. There's a story about him, and it's a little bit of a trend at the moment. But yeah, he used to be in the Navy SEALs, but now he consults a lot with sort of top-level companies. And so I did some work with him on that in terms about how do you bring those people together? How do you try and develop that leadership and that level of accountability? And I think it starts first with, you've got to ask the right questions. I mentioned that before about, your origin story. Why is it what you do? Why do you do that? Why do you play rugby? Why do you coach rugby? Or why do you coach strength and conditioning? So you've got to understand the players and the coaches on an individual level. And you've got to understand, right, how do they like to be communicated with or motivated with? And then you've got to show them. So, for example, if I'm seeing a player, it's a common one, I'm seeing a player that's doing something well, then I've really got to push that and show the whole group, that behaviour there is outstanding. Whether that, I don't know, say, for example, it's a kick chase, let's say, the effort on that kick chase is outstanding. This is what we really need here to make this club successful. And as we all know, high performers, they love and they want that feedback. So the rest of the group watching that, they go, I want that feedback. I want that praise. So therefore, then you're trying to encourage that behaviour to be repeated again and again. And it's the same with things off the field as well. So as coaches, we always like to point, and highlight things that can be measured, whether that's GPS, whether that's game statistics. But it might be that, a player has done something selfless. Maybe they've spent more time doing some work in the community. Now, this season's probably been a bit different because of COVID, but prior to that, it could have been that. Or it could have been helping another player as well. Maybe another player's been going through some challenges, and it's just about us as a coaching group recognising that, talking to that player, saying, look, I hear that you've done this. I think that's really beneficial to the team. And making them aware that you notice that and that you appreciate that. How do you make that environment more player driven, if you want, for a better expression? I think it comes back to, again, something that I would have gone through with Dave, which was active participation. So if you want to get people involved or have greater ownership, you've got to get them involved in it. So we have a senior leadership group, and we try and involve them in a fair bit, but they've also got to be ready for that as well. And sometimes you've got to help them because they don't always necessarily want to have those difficult conversations with their teammates, because they're friends with those guys, and some of them think, well, if I give him that feedback, then perhaps he's going to think less of me. So it's about trying to coach and help them with that. And I would say that's an ongoing process. I would say I don't think anywhere has probably got that 100% spot on. For sure, you hear of some environments, like obviously, we played them recently, but Saracens are renowned for having a good environment. But even I listened to a podcast the other day with Alex Sanderson, and he was talking about it, and he just said it takes a lot of time. When they had Brendan Venter come in, it was more of a sort of a coach-driven environment, but now obviously it's coming full circle to player-driven. And I think for us, we're really young as an organisation. We've got to make sure that we've got the right characters in that senior leadership group. Something different this year that we'll do is we'll probably put out a little bit of a small job advert and not make it open to anyone, so anyone within the squad can apply. And then what we're hoping to do then is get more of a diverse mix, and perhaps a group that's more representative of the squad as a whole, not just maybe your stronger characters that you might normally associate and just sort of handpick them. So in answer to your question, I think it's something that you have to work at every day. It's really hard because you can't measure it. As I said, it's not like a GPS stat or a tackle completion rate. It's something that's a lot more intangible, but I also feel that it's something that's a lot more powerful if you do get right. I think we've made some strides in it this year, but I think we've got to make some even bigger strides next year if we're to be successful. But as I said, it's something that you have to be diligent about and work on, because ultimately it's about relationships. It's a relationship. So just like any relationship, you have to invest in that relationship on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd love to hear more about the idea of a job description or an advert, and just seeing what the thought behind that is, because that makes sense to me. The senior players group ends up actually being just the same person times 5, the same role. And so you don't get any diversity. You don't get any guys challenging opinions or thoughts. And then the problem with guys looking to step up to that, and you were talking about guys giving feedback, critical feedback. The perception is that you have to be perfect, or you have to certainly not slip up if you're going to be the one giving feedback. So guys, hold back, and then you don't get that buy-in. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about the advert piece and the kind of the potential of kind of broadening out the range of that senior players group?
Yeah, definitely. So it's something that we've just been putting together recently, and in the first week of pre-season, we'll put that advert out to all of the players. And it's just looking at, again, what are some of the traits and attributes that we would want from the senior leadership group. And, ultimately, they're probably the same everywhere for that type of person, but, you want them to be positive. You want them to be able to hold each other to account, drive the standards on and off the field. And then you want them to be approachable as well. I think one thing that we would want from every player, and again, this is always a challenge in players and staff, to be fair. We had a good coaches meeting the other week, and everyone spoke quite freely, but it's trying to get the players to do the same thing as well. And I guess that takes time as well, because some players feel more confident speaking out in front of their peers than others. And, others that are perhaps a little bit more introverted prefer to speak on more of a, say a one-to-one or a small group basis. But those are some of the traits that we're looking for, and that we put on the advert. We will ask the players to give a small presentation as well. We're yet to sort of formulate what that task may be, and then have a few sort of question and answers between them and some of the other coaches, and see how they get on. Because I'd agree with you. I think in the past, even at Ealing in the past, you end up with maybe the senior player group being all similar personalities, maybe all quite extroverted. Maybe all around a similar age demographic, maybe a similar playing level. Guys that have played at a higher level, maybe you automatically assume that they should be on the group, and maybe they're not the best ones to have on the group. So, we'd be hoping to get a few younger players and a few more of a bit more of a diverse group to give us a different way of thinking as well. But I think it's also important how you use the group, because I have seen in some places where the group is there, but probably not really utilised to its fullest potential. Now, for sure, I think it's like anything, someone has to make the ultimate decision in a big organisation, and sometimes, the players may have a view, and ultimately as coaches, it's our job to perhaps make those decisions for them in some instances, because we can see everything from, I suppose a helicopter view, if you like, a long-term view, whereas I think players, and rightly so, they're more I suppose, on the here and now and focused on the game that's coming up on the weekend or the particular month that they're in. Whereas as coaches, I think you've got one eye on the here and now and you've got the other eye on what's coming up on the horizon. So I think it's about having that collaborative approach, really, but also understanding that there are some non-negotiables. So for us, at Ealing, some of our non-negotiables would be, the intensity that we want to train at. Our work rate is something that we pride ourselves on. We had to shift that perception before myself and the head coach, Alex Godwin, came in 2016. That perception probably wasn't there. That perception was of an affluent West London club that liked to play an open brand of rugby, but maybe were a little bit or struggled a little bit with the nuts and bolts of the game, didn't have the greatest defence, and perhaps didn't work as hard for each other. But that definitely has changed now, I would say, from my perspective at least.
Great stuff, Tom. Really, really good insight, and a lot of stuff to balance up. Just even just what you're saying there is resonating massively with me about players being focused, and you want them to be focused, and you want them to be only concerned about that next game. But also you want them to impact the culture and the environment and where we're going and what the long-term vision is, and just getting that balance of what you're expecting from the players is a really interesting conversation. You mentioned about communication there. Obviously, Keros, we specialize in providing scheduling communication platform for elite sports teams. How important is communication? And that's to a lot of different levels, as in communicating the schedule, where you have to be and what time you got to be there. But additionally, what's your requirements for the session? How are you required to behave on and off the pitch? And away from like operational stuff and more of like a club philosophy, how important is communicating that clearly to players?
Yeah, I would say that it's critical to the success of an organisation. Communications and relationships for me are the two most important aspects. As you mentioned there, I think communication is such a wide-ranging topic. It comes down to, as you said, you might be having a coaches meeting, planning a session, right up to how do you communicate, with different players right across the squad. So, for instance, every club now has their, the wellness monitoring, full GPS, full performance analysis software. But I still think that there's no substitute for having those small conversations as well throughout the day. With a player, it might be, how are you getting on? How's everything off the field? How's the family, etc. I think those conversations are worth their weight in gold. But I think they also require the most effort from both parties, which is why sometimes I think it doesn't happen. And because the other types of communication, whether that's electronic or written, different format, is a little bit easier. We're all guilty of that with technology. I think technology is fantastic, but I think it has to be an accelerator of what you're trying to do. Whereas I think sometimes if it's not used correctly, it can almost be sort of a bit of a paralysis situation, because you've got all these different apps. You've obviously got all the social media that you can communicate with people now, which, if used correctly, again is really good. Just from my own self-development, I wouldn't have made contact with half the people that I speak to if it wasn't for social media. So it definitely has a purpose and a place. But I think how you communicate with people is just as important as to how often you communicate with them. It's about understanding the individual. I think the players coming through now, they ask a lot more questions. So when I first started in 2005, if I can try and go back that far, I would say that a lot of the coaching was very prescriptive, very sort of, well, not very, but could be dictatorial. I think to an extent that still exists, but I think the players, they need to know now, they're more informed, because some of the facets I've mentioned in terms of social media, all the information that is out there. So if you're presenting a pre-season to a player, they want to know, why is the week scheduled the way it's scheduled? Why are they doing this amount of speed sessions, or why are they working on their skills on these days? So it's about trying to inform them and get them to understand the approach that you're using and the why. And yeah, for sure, sometimes you can give them a massive explanation as to why you're doing that. Other times it might just be a case of, because you're in the moment, it's like, look, this, we're doing it this way. I can explain it to you after, but you just need to get on and do it, kind of thing. But yeah, I think communication and, as I said, relationships as well are massively important.
Great stuff, Tom. Game Week. This is called the Game Week podcast because we like to kind of just dig into on the mindset and the approach and the change in emphasis in a game week at the start of the week. Obviously, maybe slightly more detailed and how that changes throughout the week approaching the game. Do you want to give us a bit of insight into that and how that shift occurs?
Yeah, definitely. I can probably go into a little bit of detail about what the thing that we used for our club this year, because of the league season was quite condensed into 10 league games, and then we had the 2 playoff games with Saracens. So myself and the coach who looks after the forwards and defence, Glenn Townsend, along with some of the analysts, we were sort of brainstorming a theme to try and sort of encapsulate the short and condensed season. And so there's one sporting event that's roughly the same amount of time, which is the Tour de France. And so we attributed each game. We had a big map put up in the gym with all the stages and the games. And we had sort of little awards. We had like the yellow jersey, the red jersey, the green jersey for various different things, whether it was the top performer in terms of the player, who the players voted for. And also we had an award for the domestique, which is like the guy on the Tour de France that does a lot of the unseen work. So this was usually one of the players that perhaps wasn't selected but was helping the team to prepare. Again, the players voted for that. And then we had like a work rate award as well, which was the green jersey. So that was our theme really. But then in terms of how does, I suppose, the game week look for us and how do we sort of work towards that peak on the Saturday? We train Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and we look to sort of build the week as we go. So Monday's about preparing, our game plan, what we're going to do. Tuesday for us is about doing it at pace, so full pace. And then Wednesday is about putting it into a pressurized environment. So if you like, 15 on 15, we have Thursday off, and then Friday is like our captain's run or performance day, where we look to just sort of fine tweak things heading into the game in the weekend. But it's really important for us that the technical, the tactical, the physical and the mental really builds towards that tough session on the Wednesday. And then we allow it to come down a level with the day off before we build back in again onto the Friday heading into the game on the Saturday. And so it sounds quite simple, but you've got to make sure that your messages, I'm quite fortunate some of the coaches are very good at the messaging and how they run some of the meetings, whether that's getting the players to be in small groups and watch clips and feedback to the rest of the group on that, or take a bit more ownership into some of the review and the preview. Because we all know it can get quite monotonous if it's the same person up there going through the same, debrief and the same preview. So we try and make it as varied as possible to sort of capture the imagination, but also make sure that key message isn't lost in there either.
Great stuff, Tom. That's really insightful and very creative with the Tour de France. I know a lot of other teams. I know the All Blacks are very good on changing up the theme and just bringing something in fresh, just to shift that focus for the week and the challenge that's ahead. So good stuff, Tom. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Really enjoyed that chat, and we wish you every success. You seem to be building something very special down there, and we look on from the outside and we wish you every success for the future.
No problem. Thanks very much.
Cheers, Tom. Thank you.